Hello everybody, my name is Manuel F. Contreras. I'm a documentary filmmaker and documentary film lecturer, now working at NYU Abu Dhabi.
Hi everybody, my name is Bilal. I'm also a documentary filmmaker and I work as a lecturer of filmmaking practice at New York University Abu Dhabi.
The title of our presentation is We Are Barely More Than Black or White. So this is the title of our presentation. We are barely more than black or white. This study is both a panorama of the global documentary film industry, and it's also a case study with documentary filmmakers from both Pakistan and Colombia, all of this in relation to issues of representation in documentary filmmaking. What we're trying to do is to have a discussion on the Western influence on the conception, production, and distribution of documentary films, but located in the discussion with the filmmakers from Colombia and from Pakistan. So why Colombia and why Pakistan? It's because I'm Colombian, 𝗏𝘂 is from Pakistan, so this is also the personal content of this research. We as Colombians and Pakistanis, we have a similar understanding of the world. We used to say with 𝗏𝘂 that the moment we met around 10 years ago, it felt as if we were siblings, as if we have a similar understanding of the world, and also we similarly understand how the world is looking at us. For example, it's for us, it can be a potentially equally unpleasant experience to go to an international airport. We have been the prey of negative stereotype jokes by people who are even close to us. And all the time we have to prove constantly that we are not that Pakistani and that we are not that Colombian. And by having to prove that, we have to also try to prove that this Pakistani, that Pakistani, or that Colombian, they do not exist. They are a construct of a hegemonic discourse in media, but we seldom have the opportunity, which means that Pakistani or that Colombian are still roaming the world, carrying bombs and drugs and looking for the next victim, which could be you. This exercise, unfortunately, has to bring us back to Nanook of the North, the many times referenced Nanook of the North, because it feels like the fate of documentary filmmaking was sealed from the beginnings of its industrial and commercial successes. Nanook of the North presents a very long list of inaccuracies that are far from being innocent. Those inaccuracies are the manipulation of chronological and behavioral manipulation of the Inuit in Canada. But still, this film, 100 years after, still regarded and taught by many in film schools as the prime example of documentary filmmaking. As, for example, as I quote here, Pablo Mora Calderón, he says that he's as being declared as the first documentary film and the first example of visual ethnography since the invention of cinema, and this which keeps being repeated ad nauseum, as if in a nightmare. Another simple example is that in the film Nanook Revisited, another documentary film, Charlie Nayu-Malok, whose father was friends with Nanook, he says it was a film for the white people. So there is no doubt that the manipulation there had a specific audience. Another very important example is Jean Rouch, father of cinema verite. He's one of the most important documentary film directors in history, part of any film class in film schools all over the world, and he has influenced already 2 generations of filmmakers. There is an ocean of literature praising his work. Nevertheless, the criticism that he sometimes received testifies of the seldom discussed problems many, including us, So in regards of his position in relation to the people he was filming. For example, the comments that he is receiving here, that we quote here, this happened in 1977 at the Margaret Mead Ethnographic Film Festival, testify of the otherism of the African versus the deep psychological exploration of the European in his work. Furthermore, in 1985, Argentine anthropologist Adolfo Colombres said that Rouge, quote, made the conscious decision of selecting characters that serve the purpose of not being politically engaged, but rather following the stereotype of the observed black, who is not a good worker, is lazy, but is a good dancer, end quote. But these comments are still fairly marginal in film history, being film historiography a Western endeavor. But these are not exceptions or occurrences of the past. In 2016, the British American documentary film 𝗕𝗏𝘂𝘁𝗵 was released. And according to the original synopsis of the film published in January 2016, the film follows 𝗖𝗍𝗄𝗻, a 13-year-old nomadic Mongolian girl who is fighting an ingrained culture of misogyny to become the first female eagle hunter in 2,000 years of male-dominated history. The thing is that anthropologist Adrian Major challenged those claims by showing that women in the region have been practicing eagle hunting for even more than 2,000 years. And then she adds that the filmmakers have also misrepresented the historical independence of women in Kazakh and Mongolian culture. Mongolia is far from being backwards. For example, 70% of college students in Mongolia are women, and strong women have always been part of the Kazakh nomad heritage. This film, again released in 2016, so not so long ago, premiered at the Sundance Documentary Film Festival. It was bought for distribution by Sony. The 20th Century Fox also bought the rights of the film for an animation remake, and it is widely available for consumption on streaming platforms nowadays. Even if these claims came out and the director had to accept what it was being said, the film had, the only thing that changed was that there was a rather deceiving news synopsis, but apart from that, nothing in the film changed. So this is the repetition of something that started happening 100 years ago. But this is not something that is even strange. This is something that keeps happening nowadays.
In this study, there is a big emphasis on film festivals and film funds simply because the great majority of documentary filmmakers can only make their films if they find financial support. We have studied these aforementioned factors through the lens of visual representation in order to show how issues of representation in documentary filmmaking are not a collateral effect. They actually debate how the dominant film industry and its practices are conceived. There is a significant and eloquent body of academic research, both for narrative and documentary film, on the problematics that have nurtured this research. For example, the universal media narratives, which are actually white, male, and Western narratives. Funds in film festivals end up producing quote-unquote festival films that are tailored for the taste of that festival. Festivals and funds use methods that are reminiscent or inscribed in colonial relations. But still, this is marginal information when compared with the amount of articles written on the usual topics. Also, filmmakers are completely alien to this type of academic literature. Which brings us to the paradox. The current relevance of this discussion is also founded on the paradox that documentary films have never been as popular as now, though there seems to be less variety than ever, mainly because of the interests of the streaming platforms and their financial interests. The above described panorama led us to attempt to find out how these views are received and if shared by documentary filmmakers from Colombia and Pakistan. They are the ones presumably affected by these circumstances, and at the same time are the creators of the raw material that feeds this discussion. This led us to examine the possibility of weaving a collective voice composed of the fairly absent opinions of documentary filmmakers. As part of the case study, we spoke to 10 documentary filmmakers. 5 of them were from Pakistan and 5 from Colombia. Among all of the conversations that we had, we are going to be presenting 4 of these conversations with you over here.
Colombian filmmaker 𝗪𝘂 made a film, a very intimate film about herself and her family, which bears the name of her mother, Clara. She mentioned to us that there has been a clear international demand for Colombian documentary films about the Colombian peace process of 2016, which reinforces this one-dimensional view of the country in constant armed conflict. One bias that she also found in the process of distributing her film and showing her film was that in Colombia, the films that were awarded abroad are of priority for Colombian local distributors, even if they are of lower quality, which shows one more trace of the international involvement of the film industry, even in Colombia, in the local context. She also shared with us that at some point she felt that this situation ostracized her film in Colombian distribution processes. The distributor was not interested in her film, they were not interested in distributing her film, but so this gave us a result that 𝗪𝘂 took the distribution of her film as a personal endeavor, which presented actually very positive results when the film was warmly received in Colombia, also in numbers of audience by the Colombian audience. And the film slowly after that has found its own place in the Colombian market and also in the international market, being the film selected now for different film festivals, which didn't happen at the beginning because it was always mentioned to her that the film was too intimate, too local for the international audience, which is a line that filmmakers often receive when they try to find distribution for their films, especially when they come from narratives that don't belong to the Western type of narrative that is used regularly in film festivals and film funds.
Anam Abbas is a Pakistani-Canadian documentary film director and producer. Her works include Showgirls of Pakistan and 𝗷𝗫𝗆, among others. In our conversation with her, she also highlighted similar challenges mentioned by other filmmakers that we spoke to around the topic of funding constraints, usually imposed by the Western gatekeepers in the documentary film market. In our conversation, Anam emphasized the importance to create films that represent her cultural identity authentically without catering to the Western festivals, funds, or audiences, which she feels often misrepresent and tokenize films from the global south. She confirmed that the challenges faced by filmmakers in Pakistan are primarily due to the lack of a state-level funding mechanism or distribution networks, which makes these filmmakers rely heavily on foreign funding, which not only restricts the type of stories that are being told, but also imposes a Western lens that can distort and simplify cultural narratives. All of this led her to advocate strongly for creating alternate film funds that prioritize cultural integrity over commercial success. She also expressed a keen interest in establishing a South Asian documentary fund, which could be modeled after successful initiatives like the Blue Eyes Film Fund for African films, primarily to support filmmakers in South Asia without compromising on their artistic vision. Anam Abbas also spoke about her involvement with the BDS movement and how she intends to stay committed to ethical filmmaking practices that reject ties with institutions that are linked to colonial legacies and human rights abuses. Anam's stance on this issue is part of a broader call to filmmakers to seek and establish new funding mechanisms that align with their ethical and creative values. She also shared her experiences of having been gaslit by the industry, where she feels her concerns and experiences are often dismissed by the Western gatekeepers, leading her to question her own perceptions and creative process.
Mauricio Acosta is a documentary filmmaker from the Cauca province in Colombia, and much of his documentary film work was developed within the Association of Indigenous Councils of the Northern Cauca and their communications fabric. The communications fabric was an initiative by the Association of Indigenous Councils in order to have media that was for them and produced by them, that encompasses radio, television, internet-based communications, as well as mingas, which are the community meetings in which the decisions for the community are being discussed collectively. In his films, he was following the demonstrations and protests of the community against state policies, but these documentaries started incorporating how the demonstrations were depicted by the media, the media owned by the big networks, which are part of big conglomerates. He says that in those networks, indigenous people are always regarded as people who are ignorant or terrorists, and he insists that those networks, they don't have a particular interest. They just have a totalitarian view from which they define everything. He also mentions that in media, within Colombia and internationally, there is also a bipolar nature in the representation of indigenous people, because they are either wise and solemn humans, or they are ignorant, dangerous enemies. Mauricio also debated the use of the indigenous cinema as a label, because there is still a void in what defines the indigenous cinema in the authorship and in the content. He mentions that it is not clear who's making an indigenous film and what is that content. He actually tries to defend a cinema of resistance, which is something that he says aligns with the idea of what he thinks is an ideal of indigenous cinema. One very important part is that as Colombia, he refers to the Colombian Film Fund as being interested in only one type of filmmaking, and that filmmaking not connect with his interest, and he mentioning that the Film Fund should not regard only one type of filmmaking as the only possible filmmaking for the country.
Saad Khan, who is also another documentary filmmaker from Pakistan, spoke to us about his struggles with securing funding from Western sources, which convinced him to abandon traditional funding routes and instead release his film Showgirls of Pakistan on YouTube through a partnership with Vice. Saad expressed a cynical view of documentary film industry as a whole, which he sees as self-deceiving, particularly in the context of its funding sources. Saad described in length his frustrations with pitching sessions at documentary festivals, during which he faced what he described as extremely ignorant comments from funders. He talked about how filmmakers from the global south must navigate a minefield of Western prejudices to secure funding. According to him, his film Showgirls of Pakistan was expected to be reduced to fit Western narrative expectations, which focused on victimization, especially regarding Pakistani women and transgender individuals. Saad also critiqued the influence of corporate sponsorship on the content and integrity of documentary filmmaking. Drawing parallels with colonial anthropology, he questioned the authenticity and ethical implications of current documentary practices, where the dynamics of power and storytelling are often influenced by corporate profits. Adding to his critique, Saad highlighted the stark class divisions within Pakistani film industry, noting that it is predominantly those who have studied at prestigious institutions abroad, the quote-unquote brown sahibs, who end up dominating the filmmaking scene. These filmmakers often return with westernized notions and production styles that do not necessarily reflect the authentic stories and cultural nuances of Pakistan. This results in narratives that align more with Western expectations than with complex realities of local life. During our conversation, he found the seriousness with which we were approaching our questions about the film industry almost amusing, implying that to him there is nothing particularly serious to discuss or debate, with the circumstances being so evident. This perspective reflects his view that the film industry often overstates its own importance and disconnects completely from the realities that it seeks to portray. This critique led him to using platforms like YouTube and creating his project 𝗙𝗵𝗲 to challenge and subvert the established norms and serve as direct response to this disillusionment with the industry. 𝗙𝗵𝗲 aims to preserve the layered existence he witnessed growing up in Lahore by capturing the complexity of race, ethnicity, religion, and gender that conventional archives often oversimplify. This project embodies his belief in the democratization of content and rejecting traditional methods of distribution in favor of more direct, unfiltered methods of storytelling and archiving. The conversations conducted show yet again the real and tangible effects caused by the hegemonic visual representation of Pakistan and Colombia in documentary filmmaking. In our view, all of the filmmakers presented have felt its effect on their skin when rejected, cornered, patronized, or feeling gaslit. It is imperative to put a stress on the power imbalance documentary filmmakers face. Even if film festivals and film funding institutions have shown awareness in this regard, condescension is not the goal. Rather, an informed understanding of the reality of the implications is needed, especially when the industry is taking a new direction as a result of the immense power of corporate streaming platforms and their interests, which are starting to set the rules. However, filmmakers do go further beyond the present situation and do take measures, even if such measures are an acknowledgement and a reaction to the circumstances, but not a solution. For example, when looking for alternative distribution strategies on different platforms, detaching for established narratives or initiating a conversation on the possibility of envisioning other funding bodies. But these measures are conceived a posteriori, after experiencing firsthand the rules of the system, after having access to the inner workings of the documentary film market, a privilege only for the small percentage that is selected to be part of it. We can still not talk about collectively delineating concerns. There is a lack of collectively defined actions among filmmakers. Collectivist thoughts are fairly absent in their opinions, possibly caused to a large extent by the imperative dynamics of the industry that celebrates directors as individuals in a time in history when the individual has been given center stage. But let us not forget what their films represent to the filmmakers. It is the pursuit of their artistic ambition in which they invest all of themselves. Having not only to navigate the struggle to find financial resources, they also have to find validity in a system that might treat them adversely in ways that are many times indiscernible, invisible, an immaterial weapon that might as well be the originator of such lack of collectiveness, as practiced not so long ago by nations dividing and subjugating peoples. Misrepresentation is and has been, in many occasions, an act of dehumanization, and as cited before, quote, "Everything that dehumanizes the oppressed plays in favor of the oppressor," end quote. We hope this document will serve as a step forward for the articulation of a common discussion, a collective voice that might address the concerns discussed here. And with that, we come to conclude our presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you very much for your attention.
Goodbye.